Hi, my name's Jason. It's week 6, day 41 of my full-time chronic pain rehabilitation journey. Today I have an impossible task. I'm going to attempt to describe a psychedelic trip with the aim of helping you overcome your fear of one. First though, my status. Today I feel kind of slow and kind of sore, so I'm not quite my bubbly self, but that's okay. I'm going to shoot my videos no matter how I feel. My tip for you today is to listen to your body. I have an example with weightlifting. So I struggle when I'm using dumbbells for arm exercises. And the reason why is because typically it extends body or weight away from my body in the front. So if you can visualize a dumbbell in my hands, and if my arms are at a 45-degree angle, actually about a 90-degree angle from my body, then I'm suspending weight in front of my body. So that motion of moving dumbbells up and down for some reason triggers my back some. And so I try to minimize how often I use dumbbells for weightlifting with my arms. And that's my tip. Listen to your body. Your example may be different, but you need to kind of pay attention to when you're getting some kind of negative feedback. In fact, in the spreadsheet that I have, I will color a cell a yellow color whenever I think there's some kind of negative feedback that I'm getting from an exercise, so I know that the weight's too much, or that if I do too much of that, I'm probably going to cause a back problem. All right, moving on to the topic of the day, I'm going to try to describe to you a psychedelic trip. Again, I've talked about psychedelics quite a bit, and I've talked about what I call inhibitors, things that would keep people from using them. There are lots of examples. One could be cost, one could be a cultural stigma, another could be religious dietary or health laws, legality, accessibility. There are lots of reasons a person might be somewhat reserved to try psychedelics, but the real issue, I think, comes down to fear. Anything that's new is uncomfortable, and anything that seems kind of fringe and definitely out of the mainstream definitely evokes even stronger feelings of fear. So, I have been trying to encourage some relatives to try ketamine. It's a psychedelic that can help with anxiety and depression, and I offered to hold one of their hands for the initial session. And I did this because I want to alleviate their fear. And so in essence, this video is me trying to hold your hand and on the off chance that you're considering psychedelics to treat your chronic pain, anxiety, and depression. Now, it doesn't really help so much with pain. It's more of a mental aspect of dealing with pain, but it can treat anxiety and depression. All right. So when I talk about psychedelics, I'm talking about specifically 4 types that I'm familiar with. One is Ayahuasca. It's a plant from South America. Another is psilocybin, also known as magic mushrooms. There's another one called MDMA and another called ketamine. I have direct experience with Ayahuasca and ketamine, so I'm going to talk mostly about those, but I'm not talking about LSD or PCP. Those, to my knowledge, do not have therapeutic value, and so they're kind of on my not bad list, naughty list, just a list I'm going to ignore. And so don't take anything I'm saying and apply it to PCP or LSD. All right. The first thing about overcoming fear of psychedelics is realizing they're not dangerous. Again, excluding LSD and PCP. You can almost not overdose on these. You will have extremely unpleasant side effects if you do take a lot of them. I've described in prior episodes a bad trip. Again, it was very, very unpleasant, extremely, extremely unpleasant. I can't overstress that, but I didn't die. I thought I might. It felt really, really bad, but in the end, I was never in any real danger. So as long as you take lower doses, what I would call therapeutic doses, you're going to be fine. And if you're taking something like ketamine, that's going to be in a clinical setting, they're going to dose for you. So you don't even have to worry about it. You're not going to overdose. If you take ayahuasca, it's probably going to be in a I know it's going to be in a non-clinical setting. It's probably going to be in a religious setting, and there you have to choose the dose yourself. And I would, again, kind of try a single dose to start with if they have multiple rounds. Maybe 2, depending on how you're doing, but if they do more than 2 rounds, I would not advise doing that. Again, I don't know the exact dosage that they used during the ayahuasca ceremony that I participated in, but again, you're just going to want to meter it out to yourself, and less is more when you're starting out. That's the basic rule. So again, you can't really put yourself in danger. The other thing is do it in a safe setting. So I was confined to a mat when I took ayahuasca. Not confined, but I was laying on a mat in a room. I wasn't anywhere near a road or a motor vehicle or near a balcony. I was on a ground level. There was just really no chance of me hurting myself. With ketamine, I'm in a clinical setting, in a room by myself, in a lounge chair. So as long as you're, again, not taking too much, and even if you do, it's just going to be unpleasant, and as long as you're in a setting that's safe, you really have nothing to worry about. The next thing that I think evokes some fear is people are worried about getting addicted to these substances. And they're really not addictive. They've tested many of these with, lab animals. They don't come back for more. They don't get the dopamine hit. So they're not addictive. And in fact, I would argue that at therapeutic doses, they're often kind of unpleasant. They bring up emotions you may not want to deal with, some traumas that you've been suppressing. It can be kind of traumatic to take them to a degree. Not traumatic like, shake you or leave you scarred. But again, it's going to bring up stuff that's unpleasant that you often haven't dealt with. And that's not fun. So there are doses you can take these at that might be, recreational and fun. But for the most part, at therapeutic doses, it's not fun. The chance of addiction, I think, is pretty much non-existent. All right. So what is it actually like to take these psychedelics? The first one I'm going to talk about is ayahuasca. I've had experience with two, again, ayahuasca, ketamine. I'm going to talk about each in turn. And my experience with them was pretty different, and so I'm going to describe each one individually. So with ayahuasca, I would describe it as compressed therapy. So if you've ever gone to a therapist and had, conversations and talked about difficult subjects, it was like that, only there was no therapist. I was the therapist, essentially. It was just me talking to myself, and it was compressed. So it felt like several years of therapy in 1 or 2 days. So if you can kind of imagine that, that's what it's like. And the best analogy I have for it is an emotional laxative. So if your digestive system's messed up and you need to kind of clear things out so you can restore normal function, you take a laxative. Ayahuasca for me acted like an emotional laxative. It allowed me to process tons of emotion that I was hoarding inside, that I had, tucked deep, and bring up things that I needed to deal with that I would not let myself deal with otherwise. And so, again, it was extremely unpleasant, but it needed to happen. So I was actually much, much lighter when it was all done. It restored my brain kind of to a normal state. I could actually feel what it was like to be unburdened, which for me was a huge gift because I'd been burdened for so long, I didn't know the difference between burdened and unburdened. And so that's ayahuasca. The next one I want to talk about is ketamine. And this one I would compare to a cosmic roller coaster ride. So there's a lot of motion involved. There are visual elements, what you could properly call hallucinations. They have you take an anti-nausea medication, which actually might have been a good thing with the ayahuasca, to be honest. But they have you take an anti-nausea medication about an hour in advance. And you will experience visual hallucinations. For me, they were mostly geometric shapes with colors. I felt like I was moving, sometimes up and down, sideways, sometimes some spinning. So it could be a little unpleasant if you don't like amusement park rides. But what I think it's doing to the mind, it's a little different than ayahuasca. I have heard of some people having strong emotional releases with ketamine, but I think I was cleared out, using the laxative terminology, enough with my emotions that I didn't have that strong release. I've had some releases, but they've been very controlled, very moderate. So if you go with ketamine first, you might have an ayahuasca emotional laxative type release. I don't know for sure, but for me it was different. I came up with an analogy for ketamine, and I think I was going to use a Play-Doh set, but because most people, they may not be familiar with Play-Doh sets, or at least they haven't used them for so long, they kind of don't remember what they're like. But I have a 4-year-old daughter, and so first thing I thought it was Play-Doh, a Play-Doh set that can manipulate dough, where your mind is the dough and the set is the drug. It's acting on your mind. But I think a better analogy for general use with everyone that has some experience with cooking would be baking. So if you have some flour and dough and you're kind of kneading it and shaping it with various tools like a roller, or if you're making cookies and you're kind of cutting out shapes, I think that's a pretty good analogy for what's going on with your mind while you're on ketamine. And if you can think of a piece of dough that's sat out a little too long, that's dehydrated, kind of stale, and if you try to roll it, it won't move. It's kind of crusty and won't do what it's supposed to do. If you can think of rehabilitating that dough by adding more water and allowing the brittle parts to become more pliable and move and then kind of reshape itself, that's what's going on with the ketamine experience. I've done it 4 times now, and I really feel like that's what's happening with my mind. It's being rehydrated and kind of reshaped to be pliable and malleable so that I can become something different than what I was. Before I was stuck and stratified, kind of like a stale dough, and I feel like adding this water and molding my mind, if you will, because when you're on ketamine, it almost feels like you don't have a body. You're kind of just an entity, but you're being manipulated, like you're being almost kind of like melted. That's a bad analogy. Think of a toffee machine. So if there's taffy and it's being kind of like moved around, molded, shaped, reshaped, that's kind of what's happening with your person while you're on ketamine. That's why I kind of use the cooking dough analogy. Anyway, between these two, you should get some kind of an effect of I'm emotionally clear and my mind feels awake and more flexible than it felt before. That's the kind of effect I'm getting from psychedelics. And I have some tips, if you do decide to take them, that can make this a lot less difficult. And the main one is just accept what's happening to you. If you fight it, if, for example, you've taken the emotional laxative and you try to stop the emotions from coming out, it will make it more traumatic and difficult for you, more than it needs to be. The other is just to remember to breathe. You kind of bought the ticket, you got on the ride, and now you just need to let the ride go where it goes, right? If you're on a roller coaster, for example, you don't control the track, you can't stop the motion, and you can't get off once it starts, so you just have to kind of sit back, accept what's happening to you, and breathe through it. And if you do that, it's a lot more pleasant, and I would say even enjoyable. So I found the ketamine trips they've started to become enjoyable to me. There are some after side effects like motion sickness that can linger for several hours that I don't find enjoyable, but the actual experience I've come to enjoy. So just follow those tips and I think you'll be fine. Again, there's nothing really to fear here other than the unknown, and if you can find someone who's gone through this experience, they could go with you on your first time. But if not, you can leverage my experience and hopefully just remember those tips, accept it, breathe, and kind of sit back and just let it happen. And you might even find yourself enjoying the experience. Fighting for your life means facing your fears so that you can get the help that you need. And one of those fears might be an impediment to taking psychedelics. But psychedelics can heal your mind. And part of fighting chronic pain is dealing not only with your body, but what's happened to your mind. It needs to be made pliable again. You need to dredge up the emotion that you've suppressed and let it out, and psychedelics can help a lot with that. Are you still worried about taking psychedelics? If so, please tell me why. Share your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe.